Have you ever had one of those moments as a parent where you hear yourself reacting and almost immediately think, why did I just do that? Maybe you raised your voice. Maybe you became controlling. Maybe you shut down. Maybe you became anxious and started trying to fix everything. Maybe your child came to you with something small, but because you were already exhausted, overwhelmed, or triggered, your reaction was much bigger than the situation required. And afterwards, you think, that's not the kind of parent I want to be. Before we begin, I want to remind you that this podcast is for educational and faith based encouragement purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health support, therapy, or medical advice. If you've ever experienced that, I want to start today's episode by taking shame completely off the table. Because this is not an episode about what's wrong with you. It's about understanding what your default setting is. And more importantly, learning that your default setting does not have to become your destiny. Welcome back to Raising Daniels, Healing Parents, Building Courage, Leaving Legacy. I'm so glad you're here because one of the things I've been learning on my own journey is that sometimes we genuinely love God, genuinely want to parent differently, genuinely want to do better. And yet, when the pressure comes, we automatically go back to what we know. That's what I mean about default setting. It's the response you tend to fall into when you're tired, stressed, afraid, overwhelmed, or triggered. And here's the important part. Your default response may have been learned long before you became a parent. Maybe you learned to fight. Maybe you learned to run away from conflict. Maybe you learned to keep everybody happy. Maybe you learned that being quiet kept you safe. Maybe you learned that controlling everything helped you feel secure. Maybe you learned never to make mistakes. And now you're trying to raise a child while carrying some of those old survival patterns. That doesn't make you a bad parent. It means you're human. And it means there may be some places where God is inviting you into healing and transformation. Romans 12, verse 2 in the NLT talks about being transformed by changing the way we think. Notice the direction of that. Transformation isn't simply about trying harder, it involves our thinking being changed. Because if we keep believing, I have to control everything or everything will fall apart, I'm probably going to parent from control. If my child is upset, I've failed as a parent. I may become anxious every time my child struggles. If I believe good Christian parents never lose their patience, then every mistake becomes a reason for shame. But what if we started replacing those beliefs with God's truth? What if instead of I have to control everything, we begin learning God is God. I am the parent, but I am not God. What if instead of my child struggling means I've failed, we learned my child can struggle and I can walk alongside them? And what if instead of I messed up, so I'm a terrible Christian parent, we learned I made a mistake, I can take responsibility, repair what happened, and grow? That's a very different way of living. And it's a very different way of parenting. Psalm 139 reminds us that God knows us completely. He knows the part of us we understand and the parts we don't. He knows our history. He knows our fears. He knows our weaknesses. And He isn't shocked by them. So here's the first practical step. Step 1. Identify your default. This week, don't try to fix everything. Just observe yourself. When you become stressed, what do you automatically do? Do you get louder? Do you withdraw? Do you become controlling? Do you start fixing? Do you become overly accommodating? Do you catastrophize? Do you shut down emotionally? Don't judge the answer. Just notice it, because you can't change a pattern you refuse to see. Step 2. Identify the trigger underneath it. Ask yourself, what was I actually afraid of in that moment? Maybe your anger was covering fear. Maybe your control was covering uncertainty. Maybe your people pleasing was covering rejection. Maybe your withdrawal was protecting you from feeling overwhelmed. Sometimes the behavior we see on the surface isn't the real issue. There's something underneath it. And this is where I want to encourage you to slow down. You don't have to diagnose yourself. You don't have to dig into every painful memory. You can simply become curious. Lord, what is happening inside of me right now? That's a powerful prayer. Step 3. Create a pause. James 1 verse 19 in the NLT encourages us to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. That doesn't mean you're never going to feel anger. It means you don't have to let the first emotion determine your next action. So create a pause. Take one breath. Put your feet on the floor. Lower your voice. Say, I need a moment before I respond. If your child is safe, you can step away briefly and come back. That pause might feel tiny, but tiny pauses can interrupt big patterns. Step 4. Repair when you get it wrong. This one is huge because Christian parenting isn't about pretending we never mess up. Sometimes the most powerful thing your child can see is a parent who knows how to repair. You can say, I didn't handle that well. I'm sorry I raised my voice. You didn't deserve that response. I'm going to try again. That's not weakness. That's modeling humility. That's teaching your child what repentance looks like in real life. And that's part of legacy too. Because the legacy we leave isn't the only thing we get right. It's also what our children learn about what happens when human beings get things wrong. Do we blame? Do we hide? Do we pretend? Or do we take responsibility, seek forgiveness, make things right, and keep growing? Proverbs 24 verse 16 reminds us that righteous people can fall and get back up. That's such an important picture as a Christian parent. Falling isn't the end of the story. Getting back up matters. So if you've listened to this episode and you're thinking, wow, I recognize myself in this, please don't turn that awareness into shame. Let it become information. You are learning. You're becoming more aware. You're inviting God into places that perhaps operated automatically for years. And that takes courage. Your child doesn't need a perfect parent. Your child needs a parent who is willing to keep growing. So here's your challenge for this week. Don't try to change your entire personality. Choose one default response. Notice when it happens. Ask what you're feeling underneath it. Create a pause. And when you don't get it right, repair. That's it. One pattern, 1 week, one step at a time. Because healing isn't always one enormous moment. Sometimes it's 1,000 small moments where you choose a different response. And those small choices become a very different way of living, a very different way of parenting, and eventually a different legacy. Let me leave you with this thought. Your default setting may explain some of your reactions, but it does not get to decide your future. God is still working in you. You are still growing, and you can learn a new way. Until then, give yourself permission to grow without shame. Thank you for joining me on Raising Daniels. If this episode encouraged you, share it with another parent who may be carrying too much. And remember, your default setting is not your future, because this is where nervous system science meets biblical truth and where the healing of the parent becomes the inheritance of the child.